The missing link between man and our Creator may be closer than we could have ever imagined. According to reports from all over the world, dating back to the beginning of time, man has never been alone. My name is Connor the Countryman, and I believe our connection in the forest can provide us answers to the questions of the skies. There is a pyramid on our dollar and a giant on the 2000 New Hampshire quarter. The truth's tide stays determined by leaking through. People have been vanishing from our national parks and other dense areas by the hundreds, so when adventuring out into the wilderness, please take caution and be aware of the one born feet first with eyebrows that meet. Signs of Sasquatch come in many forms. Chances are we have all walked right past a Bigfoot structure while out hiking in the woods. Tree knocks, rock smacks, and ground stomps are just a few ways these creatures communicate through the environment. They verbalize using whoops, hoots, groans, growls, and moans. They have their own language that consists of ingenious words and tongue clicks, often referred to as samurai chatter. Their vocal range exceeds the limits of any human being. If you happen to stumble across arches, tree breaks, rock stacks, balanced logs, and teepee structures, there is a good chance that the wild man is near. Check the dirt for long lines, perfect circles, and other ground glyphs. These humanoid creatures are mentioned in the Bible, Quran, and many ancient texts. In the Indian Ramayana, from 400 to 700 BC, there is mention of an advanced race of monkey species called Vanara. Vana meaning forest, and Nara meaning man. The prophecy states that they shared hot purified water called Shilajit from humans. The magical liquid helped the humans develop physically, mentally, and most importantly, spiritually. The tincture is good for the pineal gland and directly hydrates the soul. In the Bible, Esau is an Edomite and is covered in a thick coat of reddish-brown hair. He preferred sleeping outside and hunting venison. Cain is the son of Adam and Eve and was also known as the Marked One. But most interesting is the Nephilim from the Book of Enoch. The sons of God came to earth and impregnated daughters of earth, creating titans, demigods, and fallen ones. The Watchers watched and waited for a window of opportunity. We forgot them, and they have snuck back into our sanctuary. The Good Book describes the era of days when giants roamed the surface, dragons soared the skies, and leviathans patrolled the deep seas. The fallen angels were determined to spread evil through the world, but God emptied the heavens and it rained down from the firmament, flooding our realm, turning the behemoths to stone. Mud fossils surround us today. Take a second look at that mountain. It used to be a lot. People know me as the Bigfoot guy. I grew up fishing, hunting, and urban exploring. I was obsessed with horror movies and unsolved mysteries. I chase waterfalls and cryptids. I bike, kayak, and rock climb where I can. I was in the Geology Society and the Outdoor Adventure Club in high school. I wrote for the school newspaper and did a lot of freelance. I played Quidditch and made films at Bowling Green. I staged, managed a punk rock musical and umpired and refereed sports. But my main passion is expanding my knowledge on mysteries and cryptids across the planet. I lived out of my car across the United States and met many interesting people. I slept under bridges at marinas, 24-hour grocery stores, and dead-end roads. While couch surfing, you meet the people you need. When you follow your destined path, all your needs are met in abundance. Hobo is short for homebody. I was a hobo, and I still am. Hitting rock bottom isn't always a bad thing. The darkest nights are usually followed by the brightest days. Through Bigfoot Anonymous, I've narrated over 500 Sasquatch encounters and interviewed countless people about their cryptid experience. I have spoken to people who have fed Harry, been touched by the creature, and others who have camped at Bluff Creek. We have covered troglodytes, fairies, Indian mounds, werewolves, spelunking, war stories, police cases, and of course, Nat Man. But my best stories were off the record, until now. This is a collection of experiences, journals, and encounters that I've been putting together since before the millennium. I was covering fire-breathing dragons in the 4th grade, the same year that United 93 flew right over my school. But articles of wild man encounters and giant bone excavations go back to the beginning of news and press. The hunt for the German wild man, the Lovelock giants, and of course, David versus Goliath. Native tribes all around the planet have stories and lore that surround these beings. The Yeren, the Yeti, and the Yowie are being spotted to this day. I've been in the same building as Yao Ming, Sean Bradley, and Shaquille O'Neal. They all have the giant gene, and their presence is felt whenever you are nearby. There's an old Irish tale about a farmer named Connor who lost his 2 cows. He searched for them all day, and he found shelter in the night. The door was answered by a tall old woman, and they were expecting him. 3 men surrounded him and transformed into wolves. They surrounded him and licked their chops. Connor started swinging his walking stick erratically, and the eldest wolf yelled at him to stop. The elder made the crazies disperse. The wolf asked him if he remembered a young wolf with a thorn in his side. Connor remembered. He had nursed it back to health. That pup was the eldest wolf. He offered him a safe place for the night and promised that he would not be bothered. He woke up the next morning on a bale of hay in his own yard. He was confused, but that was the best sleep he had ever gotten. His cows were still gone, but 3 new ones were in his pasture. The eldest wolf was there and herded them. They grew to be the greatest cows in the land while Connor became rich and successful. My homeland's proverbs go, "Lessons are won by a good deed done. All beasts are not monsters." There is artwork of religious figures with wolves, hieroglyphs of men the size of giraffes, and elephants the size of pyramids. Where did those giants run off to? There are plenty of tales of vampires and wild men in the homeland. The fountain of youth is real, and the sun is much smaller than they say. Heaven is a physical place, but so is hell. The military, National Park Service, and police have had encounters dating back to opening day. Pilots, truckers, and loggers are well aware of their existence. There have been blood, hair, urine, fecal, and saliva samples. The hair follicles have transparent characteristics. This allows the creature to camouflage themselves with their surroundings. Many tracks have unique dermal ridges. Their skeleton is very flexible, similar to a bug. They are double-jointed and sometimes crawl like spiders. They are true apex predators. They sense UV rays and can sense meditation, psychedelics, and even disability. Check out Troll Hunter for a look inside. Troglodytes can mimic animals, machines, and even loved ones with their powerful diaphragm and vocal cords. The Sierra Sounds and Ohio Howls both have voice waves that human vocal capacities can't physically reach. These creatures aren't humans that have become primitive. They are the true ancient species of man, the true natives of Earth. The Sumerian tablets may be more accurate than recently accredited. Infrasound, sonar locating, and telepathic senses are natural to their brain and abilities. If humans' air, water, and food were not poisoned, I truly believe that we would have some degree of their sixth sense. These apex predators take advantage of night vision and occupy the endless subterranean chambers of Earth. They thrive near mountains and volcanoes, but could be anywhere that a deer and rabbit could live. The existence of Sasquatch is widely debated today, even though there is a mountain of evidence and a list of witnesses that could stretch from pole to pole. The elusive beast is still an unsolved mystery to mainstream media and science. The obvious cover-up just fuels the fire more. There is a divine energy around these creatures, and I believe that they are our closest bridge to our Creator. So let's cross it. People deserve to know what's out there so we can properly protect our families. There's a chance that we can learn from them and maybe achieve peace in future generations. Look at the story of the Grinch. The quest for Sasquatch is very close to my heart and soul. The abominable snowman and Harry were a big part of my childhood. My family members have had encounters, and others have refused to even discuss the topic. I've always liked to dig where I wasn't supposed to. The creature's existence is obvious. I'm more interested to see if they are angels or demons. Let's cross that bridge where there are no cars. This journey started targeting Bigfoot, but has led me down a path of werewolves, swamp things, and many other beings that walk this earth among us. Chapter 2. Ohio Grassman, the heart of it all. The Buckeye State is famous for astronauts, Nightmare on Elm Street, and the creation of Superman, but the Ohio Grassman would scare even Jeffrey Dahmer out of the woods. With sightings going back to the days of the Mohican, the Buckeye Beast has let his reign be known through the Ohio Valley. A renegade species of wildman, the Grassmen are far more aggressive than the typical evasive Sasquatch. The legend began when two giant chiefs came to a disagreement over war with humans and the abduction of their women and children. There are more than 10,000 burial mounds in the state of Ohio. Giants have been discovered in Toledo, Chillicothe, and across the river from Wheeling and Moundsville. The natives who called the Buckeye State home have legends and lore warning of dangerous cannibalistic timber giants. The Indians traded with the peaceful mound builders and went to war with the more aggressive clans. The Cleveland Browns are dogmen, not dogs. The tribes mark their territory with many different scents and structures. They urinate and spray around the perimeter to keep humans and other Sasquatch away. They will bend trees, lay nests, and build teepee structures. They will create these shelters with fallen limbs and logs, but sometimes use entire trees. Giant 50-foot wickiups have been discovered. Usually the trees are stripped of bark and broken off at the base. 5 or 6 broken trees will be placed against a central strong standing tree, and that will be the primary part of the camp. In August of 1972, 3 different people were attacked by a beast in a small northwest town. Witnesses claimed that they saw an 8-foot monster with hairy feet. Some claimed it was an aggressive grassman, but the town remembers it as the werewolf of Defiance. The creature was spotted running like a caveman carrying a giant stick. The entire town was on high alert and is still on edge to this very day. One night, we snuck out of a friend's house to pull some pranks and meet up with some girls. We ding-dong ditched a couple of houses and lit off firecrackers in the sewer tunnels. The police were patrolling and we ran into the park in the corner of the neighborhood. The cops pulled in, so we went deep in the woods and got separated. I was terrified of getting caught, so I was blinded with adrenaline. I kept moving at a good pace and ran into the creek. I knew I would be able to navigate the area using that. I crept silently in the water, using the small rapids to mask my sound, when I heard a rustling up in the leaves ahead of me. I crept out onto the bank and quietly tried to call out to one of my friends. I was met by a deafening silence, so I approached the tree that I'd heard the noise come from. I took one step forward and I was met with rumbling below my feet. It sent a jolt up my knee and paralyzed me in a compromised stance. I teared up instantly and I knew I'd overstepped my boundary. I tried to open my hands as I backed into the creek. I ditched my lighter at the edge of the tree line to hide the evidence and to thank the monster for issuing me a warning. One of my friends is from that same neighborhood. He is a security guard, ayahuasca shaman, and filmmaker. He says he's encountered a brown shadow creature about 10 feet tall in the same woods. He also told me that he sometimes turns into a wolf while meditating, and he has the fur to prove it. I'm not sure if I encountered my buddy along the creek or his arch nemesis. That was not the only time we encountered something strange in Medina County. Near Sleepy Hollow, there were stories of a creature that lurked through the woods in my friend's region. Alex called him the Wolfman, but his dad simply called it the Beast. He warned us that the creature could smell fear and that we should stay inside after dark. Part of me just thought it was a ploy to stop us from sneaking out, but I would soon realize that he was being dead serious. We had our golf league the next morning, so there were no plans of mischief. We spent the night in Alex's basement and watched Saving Private Ryan. He had a walkout patio that led directly into the woods. There was a creek, and it was the perfect den for a predator. We made little jokes throughout the night and moved quickly when we grabbed snacks, but it was just an ordinary sleepover. Right before bed, everything changed. We were shooting pool and an eerie feeling swept over the floor. Collectively, we all caught on to the strange vibe and began investigating. We crawled out of direct view and began peering through the smaller windows. That was when we spotted some glowing eyes. They were about 6 feet off the ground and meant to intimidate. We received the message and we knew we were being stalked. The Wolfman was real. The Wolfman was close. We were paralyzed in fear. After what felt like hours, we crawled back behind the couch, shivering with chills. We tried to go to sleep, but that was impossible. We kept peeking backwards to the woods to see if we could get a visual, but it was to no avail. After an hour of stone-cold panic, we booked it upstairs and slept in his room. The next morning, it all felt like a dream, but we knew what we'd seen. The Wolfman was born. The Dogman was near. Not long after, Jake and Alex had another encounter with this mysterious beast. They were getting a ride home from the rec center with a fireman one evening. They turned into his development and they spotted the wolf creature crossing the road on 2 legs. The beast scaled a steep cliffside and ran toward a barn. I had the boys write incident reports independently, and both their stories matched. There's definitely a large cryptid patrolling the woods of Sleepy Hollow. My grandparents own a 180-acre farm in southeastern Ohio near Wheeling and Moundsville, West Virginia. There have been many Bigfoot sightings in the Ohio Valley, but the ancient burial mounds are what's most interesting. There have been hundreds of skeletons excavated that are proof that giants existed in the Americas. Recently, my mom's cousin Eddie told me about an encounter he had while hunting on the property. Before the sun rose, he was heading out to his tree stand and was being followed by something walking bipedal. When he would stop, it would stop. He said a feeling of dread overtook every emotion inside him. Ed changed his route and wrote it off as his mind playing tricks on him. When I was younger, I was hiking near the same location with a good friend, Jake. We were accompanied by my black lab Seiko and my grandparents' 2 blue heelers, Shep and Joey. After miles of adventure, we stopped below the grandchildren's treehouse for a breather. After a couple of minutes, we heard strange noises above us, and a black creature dropped right on top of us. It all happened so fast, but Jake and I took off running. The dogs were squealing and barking at this thing. They surrounded it. At first glance, I thought it was a bear or a panther. For years, I told myself it was just a giant feral cat. Recently, Jake said, "That thing was as big as Seiko." We made it to the yard and started worrying about the dogs. We could still hear the strange noises from down in the valley. But after a couple of minutes, they finally came running up. They had a look on their faces and they were acting strange the rest of the night. My grandpa has found large unidentifiable scat on the property and has had to shoot the gun to save cattle on multiple occasions. There were escaped ostriches nearby and many bobcats. Now I think it may have been a juvenile dogman. A decade later, we were camping in my backyard for a blood moon eclipse. Around 2 a.m., we were lying in the grass enjoying the sky's show when we heard something shuffling on the other side of my barn. At first, we thought it was my cats chasing prey, but we realized that they were lying nearby. We figured it was a deer, and we went back to the stars. After a few minutes, we could feel a rumbling in our chest. There was a strong reverb from a low growl on the other side of the barn. That was no deer. The cats were spooked too. We got up to investigate, but we could barely see and we only had a stick for protection. We chose to lay down and accept our fate. We internally surrendered, but the weird feeling went away after a while, and we went back to the skies. The woods across the street have many strange occurrences. There are witch stones, abandoned cabins, and homeless hangouts. Strange lights and glowing orbs were nothing new. A picture of the Whitney monster looks exactly like the transparent crawler creature crawling across the road that I saw one misty night. I'm not sure if the creature that approached us on the blood moon eclipse looked like Gollum or Azog, but it sure spooked us. I think it just sensed our psychedelic vibrations and wanted to check us out. Chapter 3. Youghiogheny Yowie, Ohio Pile State Park. The Youghiogheny has been a crucial footpath through the mountains for animals, gatherers, and even the first president, George Washington. The river is famous for its rainbow trout fishing and whitewater rafting. The waters also played a major role in the French and Indian War and the expansion of mining across Pennsylvania. In the core of the Laurel Highlands, the Yoh is usually remembered for good days and unique adventures, but the surrounding soil holds a history of more complicated times. With stories of hostile Sasquatch harassing hunters and an old Indian tale of an aquatic beast named Agua, these depths hold more mysteries than just Dimple Rock. Fayette County is no stranger to Bigfoot sightings. Newspapers and magazines covered multiple encounters in the 70s. Kids were chased out of the woods by red eyes and the entire region went crazy. Footprints, twisted trees, and animal skeletons have been found in different parts of the county. There have been loud screams that sound like dying women that rain from the valley. Creatures have been spotted watching four-wheelers, eating apples in the orchards, and terrorizing campers. In 2001, a couple was lapping their tent by a Sasquatch intimidating them by screaming and grunting throughout the night. One hiker watched the creature add a protective layer of sticks to an outcropping of rock. Another duo encountered a bush-shaking like windstorm before being chased off by the beast. Sadly, there have been many disappearances in the nearby area. In an unnamed nearby remote neighborhood, everyone on the 6-mile road had their own encounters with the old man. He has spooked hunters, stolen fishermen's trout, and is heard knocking and screaming throughout the day and night. The locals had fed him carrots, old refrigerator food, and watermelon, although he didn't know how to eat it until the woman broke it open. Then it was all gone the next morning. When the summer ended and the melons were no longer for sale, he let his anger be known. He has left flowers on the back steps of the woman and follows her while hiking. The grandmother can sense how the Sasquatch is feeling and that he is telepathic with her, but she still doesn't trust him. There have been lights in the sky and lights in the same woods, so she doesn't know if he is an alien or just an old man. I was the youngest out of 6 guys, and it was going to be my first time on white water. They told me that there had been some casualties on the river, so I was already feeling nervous. We were staying at the Summit Inn, famous for the view and infamous for the legends. Down the trail from the Laurel Highlands, this area was rich in history and mystery. It was my dad, 2 other firemen, their sons, and middle school me. The first night we explored the grounds, swam in the pool, and told stories at a local pub. That was cut short when we were horsing around and the older guys were roughing me up. I barricaded myself in the bar's phone booth and pretended to call the cops. I actually dialed and I hung up when it started ringing. They called back. Maz picked up the phone and said, "They just left," while escorting me back to the hotel. We sat outside drinking beers as the sun went down. We admired the scenic view and were engulfed in the excitement for the morning adventure. We heard howls in the distance and it reminded me of my grandparents' farm. Flashbacks of hiking the holler and tracking the deer rushed back to me. I felt like it was the night before the hunt. I was ready for the adrenaline. On the way back to the room, I definitely understood why many visitors think the summit is haunted. The vintage pictures seem to follow you down the hall and tuck you in goodnight. It's a true all-inclusive resort. I fell asleep within minutes of meeting the pillow. I was treated to dreams of Tarzan adventures and insane car chases. I felt like a tackle dummy when I woke up, but breakfast got me right back where I needed to be. We drove to the river and my eyes lit up when I saw hundreds of people carrying rafts and kayaks. Goosebumps filled my arms and I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. We checked in and waited for the safety course meeting. We listened to the experts and took mental notes. Do not try to stand up in the river. Point your toes up and reach for the rope. Hold on tight was all I needed to hear. We had decades of experience in the raft, so we vowed not to use one of their guides. I hesitated at first, but realized that some of the rafts with grandparents and young children needed their assistance much more. Minutes later, we were down the river, coasting calmly, admiring nature, and going over last-minute instructions. I was still getting used to the oar. As I flung it in the water, I noticed something in the woods. I felt a warm sensation flow through my body. I lost myself in a trance, and the sunlight felt 10 times heavier than usual. I was thankful to be surrounded by water. As I squinted and tried to peer through the limbs to see what was watching me, I felt a small whack on the top of my helmet. It was my dad hitting me with the oar, pointing my head towards the first rapid. Oh shoot! I fumbled back into position and got ready for the journey. The cool reality shook chills down my spine. The raft was divided front to back and left to right. Jim in the back would call out who had to do what, and if one person was offbeat, the raft would spin, and the chance of us flipping skyrocketed. And if the raft is overturned, the percentage of drowning also increases. I was not trying to get my foot stuck under a rock and die in 2 feet of raging water. Not today, so I did the best I could not to mess it up. We conquered the first rapid and we geared up for the next couple. Bring it on, Cucumber, Camel and Walrus, Eddy Turn, Dartmouth and Railroad Rapids. I felt invincible towards the loop, but still had that weird feeling that I was being surveyed from the riverbanks. I felt a blanket layer surrounding my body, but that vanished when I was splashed in the face by the yo. We paddled faster when Jim screamed go and held the oar in the water when we needed to turn. We were really getting the hang of it. And after a while, Jim didn't even have to call out as much. We were really working as a cohesive unit, and it felt good. We were not only one with each other on the raft, we were one with the rapids and river as well. My comfort ended where the water did, and that's right where we were heading. We all pulled up to the riverside landing for lunch and a bathroom break. The river guides passed out sandwiches while others went swimming to cool off. I had to go pee really bad. I ran off into the woods, and almost immediately when I was out of sight of the group, a strange feeling swept over me. I was unfogging my glasses when I heard rustling from behind a tree. I almost pooped myself when a little kid jumped out from back there. He was all dirty. I turned my body to cover up and shook my head in confusion. I gave up on that and went straight to the water. I jumped in and peed while pretending to cool off. I ate my sandwich in shame as I tried looking for the little kid's group. I couldn't find him anywhere, and he seemed to be too young to even be able to raft. My dad could tell something was up and asked me if anything was wrong. I told him some kid had spooked me in the woods. Phil and Nick came hustling back from the bathroom and said some people had claimed to have seen a bear up there. Maze explained that they probably eat the leftovers of lunch, and we all laughed. It was time to hit the second half of the river run. There was one unnamed rapid before the famous Dimple Rock. We eased through that and came to a stop. The guides gave the groups a choice between the deadly rapid and an alternate route. I looked to my dad and he said, "This is why we're here." I took a deep breath and I realized that he was right. Dimple Rock was an underground cave with no exit underneath. The strong current pulls you into an underwater cavern and never lets you leave. The rapid has claimed many lives in the past, but the rafting company does everything in their power to make sure it's safe. They have a full crew of people on the rock and all surrounding areas with ropes, life belts, and Kispy rings. If you hit the rock and flip, blow down the river and you'll be safe. The real problem is when the raft gets caught up against the rock and basically swallows it beneath. As we watched the group successfully conquer the rapid, my confidence grew. But the raft just before us sent a shiver down my spine. The raft had a guide, grandchildren, and elderly grandparents riding along. They were clearly fit, but not ready for the violent strike that awaited them at Dimple Rock. They crashed and flipped into the raging waters. The entire crew flocked towards them, but luckily they had already passed the deadly hole. After a bit of chaos and some mystery, we finally had the green light to go. I was relieved that I hadn't just witnessed an entire family perish right before my eyes. In that moment of clarity, I connected a few dots. I realized that child I'd seen in the woods was not on the rafting trip. Those kids we'd just watched flip were the youngest rafting. I remembered a joke from the safety meeting. That kid I had seen lived in those woods, and I think that bear that people saw was his mom. I heard screaming, and we were approaching the rock. Jim was cussing me out, telling me to paddle. Phil splashed me with his oar. I was back. I dug into the river and straightened us out. But it was inevitable. We were going to hit the rock. Jim screamed, "Brace!" as we collided with the boulder. The raft rocked, but we did not flip. I felt a second chance at life, but still felt a force from the river pulling me in. But I resisted with everything I had. I had my foot dug so deep into the bottom of the raft that I damn near hyperextended every part of my body, eluding doom. But we had survived. We collectively exhaled and let out laughter when we were out of the monster's grasp. But the journey was still a long way from being finished. Ahead, we had to face the famous bottle of wine and double hydraulic rapids, both known to be a vigorous dessert to Dimple Rock. I wasn't too worried, but I had my ego checked. I'd watched my dad go overboard, and fear swept over me. I was trying to look back and see where he was floating, but I still had to paddle correctly and make sure it wasn't going to be all of us pointing our toes in the water. It was much harder to control the winding raft with one less guy, but I had to step it up. I stabilized the barge and we pulled off to the side searching for my dad. Seconds felt like minutes and minutes felt like hours. I desperately scanned the raging water and tried looking for hints from the river crew. I was looking for his helmet on the edge of the surface and I was ready to jump in to free him. That strange feeling of being watched returned, but I didn't care. I think the other guys noticed it as well, because we continued downriver moments later. I really felt like I was giving up on my dad. I didn't want to leave. I didn't care if the bear got us. I needed to know that my dad was all right. I trembled down the river and I was beginning to regret the entire trip. The harsh feeling evaporated when I heard Maz laugh. Then Phil said, "There he is." My dad had been picked up by another group and had already made 5 new friends. I was relieved. We traded some snacks for our crew members and we were off to finish the mission. We hit the double hydraulics, River's End, and Schoolhouse Rapids, and then we took a swim in the river. It felt nice to stretch out and do the backstroke. I was sunburnt and exhausted. I laughed as the fish tickled my legs. This was what it was all about. Testing yourself, so resting yourself feels incredible. We climbed back into the raft and started paddling as Nick made another bear joke. We climbed stair-step rapid and prepared ourselves for Killer Falls. We were thrashed and thrown all around the lower yo, but still came out breathing and afloat. We finished Bruner Run and embraced each other as we had finished the journey. We pulled into the landing and loaded the rafts onto the bus. I picked a window seat on the ride back. I kept my eyes peeled for one last look at our river stalker, but I drifted away, asleep. The Washington Wild Things were one of my favorite baseball teams growing up. They were an independent minor league team that allowed you to get up close and personal with the game. My grandfather would take me out to the ballpark at least once or twice every summer, and we had many stories to tell. We have caught foul balls, gotten autographs, and even got to run on the field. But one night on our way home, something happened that I will never forget. We both got to see a creature that the local ball team was named after. Mysterious monsters are no stranger to Appalachia. The eastern United States is filled with legends of snallygaster, wampus cats, and werewolves. The native tribes and local townspeople both have serious warnings about staying away from the woods when the sun goes down. There have been many mysterious disappearances through the ages that have been linked to these unexplainable beasts. Mountain Monsters filmed an episode in Washington County. They were hunting the Dustman, the most agile and fastest of the Appalachian Mountains. In 2019, a truck driver on Route 70 watched a bear dart across the road at mile marker 3. He said the creature ran on 2 legs and had a long snout like a dog. I believe my grandfather and I witnessed the creature these men were talking about, but we called it the Wild Thing. After hitting Cabela's earlier in the day, Peppa and I drove down to Washington for the ball game. I peered out the window and pointed at a deer we spotted. There was always a bunch in the outfields and the baseball fields. We passed the park where they played the Beast of the East tournament. I wondered where they got that name. We pulled past the mall and finally arrived at the stadium. We parked in the gravel lot behind the field, and I always admired the house on the hill that could watch every game for free. We got our tickets and I ran straight to the dugout. Peppa went to the concession stand, and by the time I would see him next, I had a baseball that was full of autographs and was best friends with the mascot. The Wild Thing was some type of wild cat. The game started, and we had great seats. The Wild Things were playing the Miners, and we were out to an early lead. The pitcher threw a gem, and the game felt like it flew by. We had the game locked up going into the 9th, and we started heading towards the exit while still watching the final outs. They popped out in the infield, and we ran out to the car to beat the rush. We were westward, and I was ecstatic about the victory. I was gripping the laces on the ball, practicing different pitches and admiring the autographs, when my grandpa suddenly jerked to the left lane. I looked up and saw a deer angling right toward the road. I backed up in my seat when I realized it was on a suicidal path. The poor deer was being chased by a big, black, muscular wolf. My grandpa was flooring it when he switched lanes. We had already been in a bad wreck when his Chevy Blazer rolled, and my grandma's Buick was not ready for any dents. I turned my head back to see what had happened to Bambi, but she had leaped back into the darkness, and so did her pursuer. My stomach ached for the deer, but that's the way of the forest. My grandpa made a joke about that being a close one, but seemed unfazed by the incident. He had seen many bears, mountain lions, and a plethora of other animals while hunting, so a wolf was nothing out of the ordinary. But I felt otherwise. The presence this creature held was unlike any animal in the wild. This animal knew what it wanted. It had a purpose. The wolf was using all 4 legs, but it looked similar to a human bear crawl. It may have been a werebear. I asked my grandpa if he had seen the wolf, and he shook his head. Of course he did. He probably spotted it before me. After hunting for half a century and being a Marine, he had developed some keen skills. He mentioned that we have them that same size on the farm as well. I wondered what he meant by that. Did he know that this wolf was different? Were there lycanthropes lurking in Brock Ridge? The same creatures that King Arthur attempted to train? The pets that Adolf kept, maybe? Maybe that was what dropped from the trees on Jake and me. The offspring of the Wild Thing. The creature from the hieroglyphics. Chapter 5. Clear Lake Creature, Ontario, Canada. The cottages at Clear Lake remind me of the Robin Williams movie What Dreams May Come. There is a heavenly explosion of color and expression flooding this campsite north of the Sky Dome. The water is famous for largemouth bass fishing and summertime activities. The unique coastline and immense marshlands provide a perfect home for beaver, deer, and other traveling animals. The Rideau Waterway is rich with folklore and stories of aquatic monsters, but the locals told me of a story of the best fisherman along Ottawa, and he doesn't use a rod and reel. There are thousands of Sasquatch sightings along Ontario and the rest of Canada. There are some communities that have been completely abandoned because they have been overrun by these creatures. The Nahanni Valley is infamous for red-eyed giants that left many visitors beheaded. The people of Klemtu encountered these creatures on a daily basis. Aboriginal tribes refer to these monsters as bogs, cadeaux, critters, stinkas, jacko, maltos, and yellowtop. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan is no stranger to these strangers. The country even have a Bigfoot privy on the quarter next to the Queen Elizabeth and the maple leaf. The Kushtaka is an otterman known to save its victims before stealing their souls. The Wendigo is known to invade villages after long cold seasons when starvation is prominent. Natives who were forced to become cannibals were far more susceptible to possession of the beast. The show Hannibal is full of Wendigo imagery and is obviously about cannibalism and primal instinct as well. I have narrated many first-hand Canadian encounters. A 10-footer backed away from a tribesman wielding an axe next to a fire. A hiker saw a tall, hulking figure from 30 meters during a solo hike in BC. A Pac West train worker is sadly plagued with nightmares after numerous encounters. There was a giant footprint found in 1991 on Vancouver Island, and a driver swerved to miss one more than a decade ago in southern Ontario. Sadly, a family in Port Alberni are being terrorized by creatures they believe to be related to Gigantopithecus. One First Nation man named them Books. His village had many interactions with these yellers. He witnessed something spook a bear and force it to swim across the bay in an instant. A seismic outfit encountered a creature throwing rocks and making guttural sounds after being flown in deep north of Fort Nelson. In Renfrew, a goose hunter had an encounter while he had some decoys in the water. He watched a monster man scooping water with his huge hands. After 5 minutes, his fishing bell went off, and the creature stared right at him. It ignored the bell completely. It growled in a deep and guttural demonic growl and paralyzed him. He pulled his gun, and it ran off. It took him about 20 minutes to recover. He urged not to make eye contact with these beings. They have the ability to project fear. In the summer of 2001, I skipped most of the baseball season for a once-in-a-lifetime fishing trip to northern Ontario with my best friend's family. They had been renting at the cottages for years and had a community of friends who met back up every summer. I had heard many stories from Ian and his sisters about the lake and really couldn't wait to finally see the beautiful blue. My mom and grandpa were excited that I was getting to visit some uncharted waters and sent me along with some lucky lures. My dad dropped me off at the Coleman's and asked me to get him an Argonaut shirt. I loaded my stuff into Ian's car and went into the house for dinner. Ian was playing N64 while the twins were finished packing up, and Mrs. Coleman invited me to sit down for chicken and potatoes, her signature dish. She was staying home to take care of the animals, but had been up to the cottages plenty of times. She was excited for me to meet her people and finally see what the fuss was all about. She told me to take the paddle boat out to Bass Cove for huge largemouth. She put her hand on my hand and looked me in the eye and asked me not to let Ian go to Misty Island. And before I got to ask, the entire family poured into the kitchen, and it was just about time to go. We drove through the night, and I was in the back with the twins. They were making fun of me because I'd never water skied before. The girls said I might have to stick to the kneeboard, whatever that meant. They were talking trash about shuffleboard and horseshoes too, but at least we would all be on the same team for the US versus Team Canada soccer match. The girls didn't care to fish much though. Not anymore, they said. A few hours later, we were at the famous duty-free shop on the Canadian border. I was out of the country for the first time, if the Lake Erie boat trips didn't officially count. We met up with a family that was friends with the Colemans and the Movials. I knew them through St. Ed's, my dad's alma mater. The brothers went on to play for the Mariners and the Mets. For now, we were Cleveland brothers in Canadian territory. The Coleman clan fell asleep in the back while I rode in the front with Rich. He was the coach on the Pee Wee Falcons and had actually drafted me, but I was already playing with the Browns because they were family. He told me that I would have my own room, pointed out the buildings of downtown Toronto, and told me all about the species of fish in the lake system. He said to watch out for wolves and black bear. I asked him if that's what had scared the twins, and he replied, "The thing that scared the girls scares the bears too." The clan must have felt a familiar turn because they all woke up, and moments later we were pulling into the cottages. It was a magical feeling arriving while the birds were chirping. I ran around following Ian while he pointed out all the hot spots. He showed me the shuffleboard courts, the paddle boats, and where they displayed the nightly movie. We greeted a fisherman and found the girls on the beach. We unpacked in the cozy cabin, and it was time for breakfast. We devoured breakfast and met the rest of Ian's crew. One big kid called himself Carp, and his two cousins were named Rod and Hook. Clearly, they came from a fisherman family. They gave us a tour of their cabin, freezer, and also their tackle box. They knew all the best spots around the waterway. They were the true kings of summer. Ian was excited to show me Bass Cove. We rented a paddle boat and got our reels ready. We crossed the misty waters into the mysterious lagoon. We dropped our lines in and boom, we had them snagged. Giant bass went after our worms within seconds. We caught and released some cows. I've never seen such active waters. We were having such a blast and lost track of time. We were out there for hours, but it only felt like minutes. We were so busy unhooking and baiting our lines, we failed to notice the dark clouds approaching. After a while, we saw the storm approaching, but chose to ignore it. The fishing was too good, and I was worried I'd never have that luck again. I was right. We told each other one more catch and agreed. Rain was now falling and the waves were beginning to grow. We were stubborn and kept fishing. 30 minutes later, it was a downpour, but we were still catching fish. We heard a tree crash towards the bank and we figured it was the storm telling us to go. We both stared towards the sound and continued to fish. Then another tree fell. That one was not the wind. Ian knew exactly what it was and murmured, "We have to go," under his breath. As we packed up the boat and started pedaling, there was a roar of thunder from the sky and an even bigger one from the tree line. I was too scared to even turn around. I knew it was a monster, but I think he was trying to help us. I was taking his advice and getting home. We made it to the marina just by the time the weather was getting ugly. Waves were forming and the rain was pouring down sideways. We ran into cover with our hands full and our hearts still pumping from our lagoon encounter. Ian's dad laughed as we barreled into the cabin, soaking wet. He asked us how it went and replied, "You see it?" while smiling. Ian was still shaking and his dad knew we had had an encounter with the creature. I took a warm shower and changed my clothes in my room. By the time I climbed out for lunch, the twin sisters had heard about our lagoon encounter. They came into my room and asked me if I got a visual. I told them that I didn't see too much, but I could sure feel the monster in my chest. They told me that they had been lost in the lagoon years ago and had heard loud screams with trees crashing down. Becca swore she had seen the monster through the branches. They were afraid he was going to sink their boat, but I truly think it was the exact opposite. He warns people of getting too close to his island. He might be our buffer to a much meaner creature. The rest of the week flew by. I made a bunch of friends and those that felt like they would last forever. We made plans for the next summer and promised to keep in touch. But sadly, I never spoke to my Canadian friends again. I hope one day on our journey, our destined paths will intertwine once again. I am forever grateful for that sea monster. If we had stayed out there on those choppy waters for much longer, our boat would have capsized and we would have most likely drowned. Nobody would have heard us screaming.